following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how yous doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The National Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown, New York, recognizes the game's best players, managers, and executives. But behind the long hall where the bronze plaques of those immortals hang is a small alcove where the names, photographs, and contributions of 69 incredible baseball writers are acknowledged. They are recipients of the J.G. Taylor Spink Award given by the Baseball Writers Association of America for meritorious contributions to baseball writing. Our guest, Jayson Stark, is the 70th recipient of that award, and he will be honored during induction weekend next summer. Here in Philadelphia, baseball fans know Jayson as the beat writer who covered the 1980 world champion Phillies. He went on to gain national exposure between 1983 and 1999 when he produced a nationally syndicated Baseball Week in Review column known for unearthing obscure, historic, and humorous aspects of baseball. In 2000, Stark joined ESPN.com, where he was a senior writer and contributed to SportsCenter, ESPN News, and Baseball Tonight. In 2014, Jayson began co-hosting a weekly radio show during baseball season on ESPN Radio's affiliate in Philadelphia. A two-time winner of the Pennsylvania Sports Writer of the Year award, Jayson is the author of 3 books: Wild Pitches, Rumblings, Grumblings, and Reflections on the Game I Love, Worth the Wait, Tales of the 2008 Phillies, and The Stark Truth, the most overrated and underrated players in baseball history, all of which were published by Triumph Books and are available online at Amazon.com. Currently, Jayson writes for The Athletic, a subscription sports website and app featuring local sports articles. Welcome to the podcast, Jayson, and congratulations on your election as the J.G. Taylor Spink Award winner.
Bill, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, man. It's been a surreal week, and this just adds to it.
Well, I'm ready to introduce you. As you can see, when you get that award this summer, as you can see by the lead into this, we're really happy for you in Philly. So
I appreciate it. I know it takes a long time to go through all my jobs, and I should actually add I have 2 others. I'm a baseball analyst for MLB Network, and I'm the host of Baseball Stories on Stadium TV.
Wow.
That'll do it for now.
Well, that's an impressive resume, and I got to ask, did you ever imagine that you would be in the company of such great baseball writers as Ring Lardner, Damon Runyon, Fred Lieb, and Shirley Povich when you graduated in 1973 from Syracuse University's Communications School?
I was just trying to get a job, man. I didn't envision this, but Bill, I have been through that Spink Award exhibit in Cooperstown, and I've looked at the names on the wall many times. These are my sports writing heroes. Later on, they became my friends and my heroes, and it's still surreal to me to think of my name, my picture, my story as part of that exhibit for the rest of time. That's really humbling. And as you mentioned, it's not something that you set out in life to do, but when it happens, it's a real out-of-body experience.
You began your career in Philadelphia in '79 when you joined the Philadelphia Inquirer, and there were some wonderful writers in town at that period of time. I mean, Jim Barniak, there was Alan Lewis. They were 2 of my heroes in sports writing. Of course, the Philadelphia Daily News had a different kind of edge to it, but you had Conlon and Stan Hockman, and I guess Larry Merchant was writing back at that time.
Not in '79, but
yeah, right. I guess in '79, but Merchant wasn't right in '79. He was already up in New York, but those other guys were around. Did you have any mentors among those groups of writers?
Well, yeah. Look, I grew up reading the great Philadelphia sports writers. I'm sure that's a big reason that I have the style of sports writing that I have. It's a very irreverent group, a very thoughtful group, a very opinionated group, very tough group. And, I grew up reading all those people you mentioned. You mentioned Sandy Grady, huge influence on me. Stan Hochman was more than somebody that I read. Stan was a guy that I actually wrote to, and he would write me back. And just think about being the teenage me, wanted to be a sports writer, and Stan Hochman would actually write me back. That meant a lot to me, and just through our exchanges, and back just writing to each other early on, and then getting to know Stan, he was an incredible influence. I got to the Inquirer. Frank Dolson was there. As you mentioned, Alan Lewis was there. They both taught me so much about covering baseball. Bill Lyon I worked with. He was such a great writing role model. I just tried to pick a lot of brains. And, for all that we may think of Bill Conlon now, he was a giant in the business. And I used to study the way that he would write a game story. He had a unique style. He would hone in on moments. He could ask questions in a way that would cause people to say stuff. I'm so lucky I worked with so many talented people. Mark Wicker started at the Bolton the same year I started at the Inquirer. Gene Collier, who's now a columnist in Pittsburgh, started at the old Philadelphia Journal when I started at the Inquirer. Al Bodley was around. Ray Kelly Jr. was on the beat. I picked brains. I wanted to see how this was done. I wanted to do it as well as I could do it. And so, what a place to be, what a time to be there, and no better city to write sports in than to write baseball in than Philadelphia.
You brought your own style, though. You might have studied and looked at a lot of those guys, but particularly, I think of the daily news writers. It's a field that demands critical analysis, and many sports journalists choose to be confrontational and intrusive in order to break the big story. You've always relied on superb research skills, critical insight, and I think a genuine sense of humor. Has that approach always been beneficial, especially here in Philadelphia where the sports writers don't pull any punches?
Well, the guys that I grew up reading wrote that way. And right. I turned into me. I know I didn't turn into them, but they all influenced me a lot. And in Philadelphia, maybe more than any other city in the country, it felt like it was part of the culture of sports writers here to try to be amusing, to find stuff every day that could make people laugh and make them think, and to ask questions that would allow players to show their personality and be, and turn those funny lines out that people always enjoyed reading. And, I think I took a special joy in doing that. But my mom was a great writer in her own right, June Stark. And she used to say to me, I never knew these guys were funny until you quoted them. And I took pride in that. I always was looking for the funniest player in the clubhouse and developed great relationships with just a whole host of people, the Larry Andersons of the world, the guys that they were funny. You could go to them with some goofy idea, and they would take it and run with it, and we could have fun with it. And that wasn't obviously the only thing I did, but I always felt like the goal with every story that I wrote was to entertain people and to tell them something that they didn't know. And there's so many ways to do both, right? And that's what I've always tried to do, and I think I'm still trying to do it.
The humor is especially refreshing because some writers can be malicious with it, but, you know, your subject actually, you can feel in the writing is like laughing along with you. And, you know, that's a hard trick to pull off. Another thing I really admire as you grew in the profession is your perspective, you know, obviously, which comes with time and experience. But I want to read something that you wrote shortly after you joined the staff of The Athletic, and I think it's very instructive for listeners who do want to go on in sports journalism. The column was titled "Welcome to the Future, Where Great Writing Matters," and in that column you wrote that, quote, "In the grand scale of what matters to human existence, sports aren't that important." But you also admitted that what's important is the way sports make us feel every day, the way they give us something to care about every day, and the way they bring us a daily microcosm of the highs and lows of human existence every day. And that great writing that's what great writing does, by providing readers with unique thinking perspective and information. Jason, can you tell us how your experience as a sports journalist led to that kind of wisdom? It's a big question, but
wow, I'm just glad to hear that I've got some wisdom in there somewhere. You know, I'm going to give you a perfect example. World Series Parade 2008. You know, I don't know how many people were really at that parade. You know, you hear people say 1 million or 2 million, 12 million. I don't really know. We have no way of knowing. I know that I tried to get on the highway with my daughter and drive there, and that was not very productive. But here's one of the things that I thought that day and I've thought a lot about. There's nothing else in life that allows you to experience what people experienced that day, right? There's no place that you can go where 500,000 or 1 million or 2 million or 50,000 people all show up in the same place and they all experience this same bonding, powerful emotion together, right? Sports brings us together in a way that nothing else does. And probably in today's world, that's more true than ever. And we need that. You know, people who aren't sports fans don't get it. They think it's just some hobby, right, that people do just to kill time. Or they need to do something. But in fact, I say this all the time. These are not sports experiences. These are life experiences. These are life-changing experiences for millions of people when you root for a team and that team wins something. You know, we saw it in Philadelphia last February. That is life-changing. It affects the way you feel about everyone around you. It changes the way you feel about waking up in the morning. It's something that gets your heart thumping. It's, you know, sports matters like that. I don't know how to explain that phenomenon, Bill, but that happens, and it especially happens in a town like Philadelphia. You know, way back in time when I first got out of college, went to Syracuse University, and covered suburban news briefly at the Providence Journal, and I'll be honest, I did some really cool stories. I never felt like anybody read any of them except the people that they were about, who got quoted in them. But do you ever feel that way when you're writing about sports or talking about sports?
Oh, yeah.
This matters to people. And I at the baseball writers meeting where I won the Spink Award and kind of addressed my friends and addressed the group, I mentioned this, that when I go through that Spink Award exhibit, it's a reminder that what we all do covering sports matters. Baseball matters. Sports matters to millions of people. And what we get to do when we write about it and talk about it, that matters. And a lot of those people that read us and listen to us and watch us, they would love to be us. And so I think that explains it. I can amplify on it if you want me to.
No, I think that was beautiful. And, I'm glad you mentioned the 2008 parade, and especially sharing it with your daughter. I have 3 sons, but only one of them is really in love with sports, and particularly baseball. And he was, I guess, 12 years old back in 2008, and we went down to that parade, and there was a bond that was solidified on that day that we will have for the rest of our life. I mean, we went through that season together. And he couldn't understand, because of in his short young life, he couldn't understand why I'm always thinking when the game is on the line, I'm saying to myself, the Phillies are going to blow it. The Phillies are going to blow it. He had no understanding of all the history behind that, because wow, this is great. The Phillies are going to win. He had no understanding, but that parade, as I'm sure it did for you and your daughter, solidified really what is a lifelong bond between.
Yeah, I tell people this all the time, just because I need to make sure that they understand it. I'm not a Phillies fan the way they are, the way people around me are, the way my family is. I cover baseball for a living. If the Rays had won that World Series, that would have been a hell of a story. I'd have been happy to write that story. The next year, when the Yankees beat the Phillies in the World Series, I almost get the sense that the people around me were upset that I wrote so many nice things about the Yankees. That was a story. Somebody wins, somebody loses. Every one of these World Series. But I do think that I understand Philadelphia. I've spent almost my whole life living here. And I'll tell you a story. This is the 2008 World Series parade. Mentioned, my daughter and I got in the car. We tried to drive to the parade. That wasn't working well. So, because several other billion people had that idea, so we just got off the highway. We abandoned our car just on a side street. We found our way to take public transportation down to South Philadelphia. Now, the parade is over. We're trying to get home. We're on the Broad Street subway, packed into a car with like 1,000 of our closest brand new friends. And a guy in the subway car spots me and recognizes me. And he decides he's going to try to wriggle his way through all 1,000 of these people across the car to talk to me. And so I watch him kind of, he's ducking and he's weaving and he's squirming, and eventually he makes his way over to us. And he looks at me and he bursts into tears.
Wow.
And he hugs me. And then he says to me, I just got to say thank you. Thank you for telling our story the way we see it, not the way the rest of the world sees Philadelphia. Yeah. And so if I did that, that's pretty cool, right? I'm always trying to do that, represent Philadelphia when I can, and let people know that that's where I'm from, and I get it, and I get Philadelphia. And there was a time where I almost had a little guilt about that. But one of my best friends in the world is Peter Gammons, who came from Boston and then became a big national figure, right? And you think people ever forget Peter's from Boston? He doesn't want them to. And we can write and talk about all kinds of stuff, but that's where we're from. And it's okay to remind people that's where we're from. So that's one of my coolest memories ever from my career.
Well, we've been talking about 2008. I want to get to 1980 because that's when I first started reading you. And that was a phenomenal time to cover the Phillies. First World Championship, they were in contention really for the next 2-3 years. I know you must have a lot of memories, and in all fairness to you, I've got to ask you before I quiz you on 2 other memories. I got to ask you what your best memory was of that season.
It was exhausting to cover that team. There was a lot of drama all the time. Some of it was involved us, the guys covering that team, and the guys playing that team. We weren't all best buds, but I always tried to recognize what was unfolding. As you just mentioned, that was the first time in the history of the universe that the Phillies won the World Series. Phillies don't get enough credit for their drought. The Cubs, Red Sox droughts, they're legendary. Right. The Phillies went 93 years without winning. And that was kind of a big deal too. And so there were so many storylines and so many larger than life figures, and just every day it was something. That team had been a great team before I ever got there to cover them. 76, 77, 78, that was before my time. They were one of the best teams in baseball. 79, they all got hurt. 80 didn't start out so hot, and then the last 2 months, that team caught fire. And I don't even know where to start with all the different tales, but.
Well, let me remind you.
This is unbelievable, amazing.
Two experiences you had that didn't have such nice endings, and I want you to tell me what you learned from them. Okay. Here's the first one. Sunday, September 25th at the Vet, the finale of a 3-game series against the Montreal Expos, who were in dead heat with the Phillies for first in the NL East at that time. Montreal wins the game when Gary Maddox, blinded by the sun, misplays a line drive off the bat of Chris Spire. Okay? Now, the Cubs are coming in the very next day, and before the next game, Maddox is benched by Green, and he approaches you in the clubhouse. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember it. Let me try to fill you in, because there's a lot of history that went into that day. All right, halfway through that 80 season, there is a famous story that not broken by us, broken news side by the newspaper in Reading, about how the Reading Phillies team doctor was allegedly writing prescriptions for amphetamines to a bunch of different Phillies. Right. And, we don't need to go through the whole thing, but from that moment on, there were a bunch of players in that team that didn't talk to anybody, didn't talk to any of us for months. And it was very tense, always. That players and writers, and then there was Dallas Green, who was the manager. His first full season as manager. Dallas had a few thoughts. They were very loud thoughts. They weren't thoughts that often endeared him to his players. And so that's the whole backdrop, okay? So now, Phillies go on a West Coast trip that ends the Sunday before Labor Day, if I remember. They're playing an afternoon game in San Diego, and Gary Maddox is in center field. Very bright sunny day because it was San Diego, and he lost the ball in the sun. Mm-hmm. And, I had a line the next day, like it wasn't, trying to think here about, wait, can you edit this? Well, I just try to think aloud.
No, that's
okay.
Fine.
All right. I had a line in my game story the next day because this ball that he lost in the sun cost him the game. The manager was particularly hard on him. Paul Owens, the general manager, came roaring into the clubhouse and dressed them all down. And anyway, I think I said something like, referring to the fact that he wasn't wearing sunglasses, that he never would have made it as a Blues Brother. Okay, I didn't leave the story with it. Like 9-10 paragraphs into the story, just describing that play. Just me trying to be my usual witty self, or whatever the heck I was. All right, so nothing really came of that. Apparently he didn't like that joke very much, but nothing happened. Okay, so now, fast forward 3 weeks to the game you just mentioned. Because of that loss, that was going to determine which team went into first place heading into the last week of the season and was in control of the race, Phillies or Expos. So the Expos win the game. It's a devastating loss. Devastating. And what happened? This was a late afternoon start on a Sunday afternoon. And once again, a ball got up into the sun, which was hard at the vet, but the sun used to sometimes shine in between the levels, if you remember, as it was going down. And once again, Gary Maddox, not wearing sunglasses, lost the ball in the sun. Ball fell. Winning run scored because of it. And it turned the game. And once again, Dallas really, really unhappy with this ball not being caught. And so, in my story, again, didn't lead with this, maybe 10 paragraphs into the story, I mentioned that he lost the ball in the sun, wasn't wearing sunglasses in San Diego, then lost this ball in the sun, wasn't wearing sunglasses, and said nobody had had this much trouble with the sun since Icarus. Icarus was the mythological figure whose wings melted because he got too close to the sun.
Yep.
That was a pretty good line, actually. But let's just say Gary Maddox did not agree, didn't find the humor in it. And so that the next day, all right, now they're going into the last week of the season, pretty much have to win out if they're going to win the division and make it into the postseason. So I walk into the clubhouse with all the other media, and I haven't seen the lineup yet, but immediately I get tapped on the shoulder, and it's Gary. And he says, I need to talk to you. Follow me. So, I've been around enough to know this isn't good. So he starts leading me away from the main clubhouse, and we're in places that I've never seen, where the writers don't have access. And then he finds basically a broom closet, equipment closet, and says, in here, slams the door, and then he vents. And look, players get mad at writers, and I don't blame them. Sometimes we deserve to get yelled at. And he was not happy. But, I heard about Icarus. I heard about a lot of stuff. He was just venting. And at the very end of this vent, he says to me, have you seen the lineup tonight? And I said, I just walked in. I haven't seen it. And he said, well, I'm not in it, and you're the reason. And I said, hold on a second. I can guarantee you that nobody consulted me when they made out the lineup. And he said, no, you don't understand. Our manager, he manages for you guys. He manages to please the press. And that really is what those guys thought of Dallas. They thought it was him and us lined up against them. That was really the dynamic that was in place in that team. And they're about to go on and win the World Series, I remind you. Right? So, look, he vents for quite a while. We were in there, I really don't even know how long, but it was a long time. It was at least 10, 15 minutes, right? So, we talked things out. I think, we're going to be okay. And now we go back into the clubhouse, but everybody had seen this. And so they all wanted to know what happened. And, just like when you've had an experience, and you tell your friends about it, that's really what this was. I didn't consider it news. I just said he wasn't happy with the story. He wasn't happy with the Icarus line. He wasn't happy with not being in the lineup. And I didn't go into big detail about it, right? But here's the problem. Here's why this became such a huge deal at the time. He wasn't the only one who was benched. Larry Bowa got benched that night. Bob Boone got benched that night. I'm sorry, no. Let me think about this. Boone. Okay, hold on one second. Let me think it through.
Bo was definitely benched. I remember that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, right. So Larry Bowa got benched that night. Bob Boone got benched that night. And Gary Maddox got benched that night. These are three pillars of this great team that had won the NL East 3 times in a row and were icons in Philadelphia. And with a week to go in the season, basically needing to win every game, Dallas Green had benched all three guys, and they were fuming. And so not only did Gary Maddox confront me, but Larry Bowe actually had a pregame radio show back then, if you can believe it, as a player.
I remember.
And went on his radio show and ripped the manager.
Yep. And
so suddenly, this was no longer just this innocent thing that had happened between me and a player. This was news. This was a story. And so, the AP wrote a story about Phillies in turmoil and included my thing with Gary Maddox in the AP story. So, it wasn't going to be a big deal until then. Now, everybody in the press box had to come up and interview me about what happened. And I said to all of them, look, it wasn't that big a deal. He wasn't happy. He wasn't in the lineup. It's just something that happens. But it didn't fit their storyline. It was funny to be on the other end of it. And so then all of that went into the stories that were written early, before the game, during the game. And then after the game, which was an epic game. Remember, this is a team that has to win every game. And this game was 15 innings. The Phillies fall behind by 2 in the top of the 15th, come back and score 3 in the bottom of the 15th to win. And who comes off the bench to get a huge pinch hit in the 15th inning? Gary Maddox.
Gary Maddox, right.
Now, after the game, go down to talk to the manager, as we did, and, even after the biggest win of the season, Dallas Green was in a rage and actually says there are guys on this team that don't want us to win, that all they care about is themselves. All right, this is that's the biggest win of the season, right? And so it just turns it into an even bigger story. And look, I've had people that I've covered who have been unhappy with me before. This was the only time it really turned into news. Look, I felt sorry for Gary, that this is what this confrontation turned into, because he tried to address me in private, which is what you'd want players to do. I try to be a professional and a human being and sensitive to the fact that human beings are on the other side of everything that we say and write. And I really did feel sorry for Gary Maddox that this turned into news. That really was never his intention or my intention. Just stuff happened when you were covering the 1980 Phillies. That was one of the stuff.
Yeah. The other end of that equation though was Dallas, and I know we're running out of time here, and I want to get at least to one more question before we have to.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
The second experience, I think, is very telling because actually a couple years before Dallas passed, I had a really neat interview with him, and I asked him, I said, did you ever have a favorite, in all the media? And he named you.
Wow.
And he said that you took an awful lot of abuse from him, too. And he kept coming back, and you had a sense of humor, and he really admired that. But I want to go back to the second incident, because I had an incident like this covering Roger Clemens when he came to Wilkes-Barre to get ready for whatever season it was when he was coming back in May or something like this. And it made ESPN, where he had a blow-up, and it was after a rather innocuous question that I asked him. But at any rate, in your case, the second incident was August 12th, 1981. It's the strike-shortened season. It was the first game back from the strike, and the Phillies were routed by the St. Louis Cardinals 11-3. The Cards had cranked out 14 hits, including 3 homers, 4 doubles, and a triple, and Dickie Knowles surrendered 5 runs in the 9th inning alone. After the game, you're in the clubhouse. I guess Green was doing the post-game interview, and you ask him if he thought that the strike had affected the performance of his pitchers more than the hitters.
Let me explain this.
I know what you got.
Yeah. Here, all right, let me set the stage for this one. Okay, Phillies win the World Series in 1980. 1981, they have the best team in baseball for the first 2 months. And then what happened? The baseball players went on strike for the next 2 months. And when the strike finally ended, Dallas Green was not a happy man. Sound familiar? I mean, I love Dallas. We can talk about him in a second, but he was really unhappy. He felt like a bunch of his players had not stayed in the proper shape. He wasn't happy about that. He was really upset that baseball decided they were going to do like a split season format where the winner, the teams that were in first place at the time of the strike were automatically in the playoffs, and then there'd be a second half winner, and that team would also go into the playoffs. And so the Phillies came back and had nothing to play for. It was not Dallas's favorite thing. And like the only thing that he was trying to muster optimism about was he felt like at least his pitchers were in good shape. And he thought, well, at least our pitchers are going to be ahead of our hitters. And maybe that'll keep us competitive. And then the Cardinals came to town to start the second half and scored 7 runs the first night and 6 or 7 runs the next night. And then the third game was this 11-3 wipeout that you mentioned. And this was another one of those days where you go down and see the manager, and you just had to take one look at him and know, oh, my God, it's going to be one of those nights, huh? And, look, I covered Dallas at that point for a year and a half, and I did feel like we had a good relationship. And nobody wanted to ask anything because you could tell what was about to come out of his mouth, right? So I had a way where I could sometimes lighten the mood and we could get going. So I thought back to the fact that he said, well, at least the pitchers are going to be in good shape, and maybe that'll keep us going. So I said to him, do you think this means the pitchers aren't ahead of the hitters anymore? And the next 4 minutes were epic. That's all I can tell you.
You cannot repeat on these airwaves, Jayson, what he said to you, but we can just give us the gist.
It started out with 3 magic words: believe you, Jayson. And I could do a bunch of this pretty much from memory, but he said, ask the bleeping question right. Okay? Then he went into a diatribe, seriously, for 4 minutes that he clearly had been thinking about and was gonna and wanted to say no matter what anybody asked.
Yep.
But it included this absolutely epic, I don't know if this is a sentence or whatever it is, but anyway, he said, I want bleeping stopped all the bleeping bull bleep about how bleeping horse bleep this bleeping split bleeping season is. I can't do a bleeping thing about that. There were a lot of fun topics like that came up. A lot of words were uttered that will never appear on like SpongeBob. And in the middle of it, these were the days when post-game press conferences were not in the interview room. They weren't televised. They were in the manager's office right off the clubhouse. And so at one point, as he was just roaring at the top of his voice, he walked out into the clubhouse to take a look around to make sure they were listening. And he came back in and he finished. But I noticed something as we were nearing the end of the diatribe. He was almost like winking at me like, thank you. I needed to say this. And here's what I learned, that you're going to cover certain people in your time who are going to get angry. And sometimes it's not personal. most of the times it's not personal. It has to do with what just happened. It has to do with what we both do for a living, and it's often said for effect. And, you know, the great thing about covering Dallas Green was, as mad as he could get at me and everybody else, he could turn the page so quick. And, like, he turned it that night before he even finished talking. Like, when the diatribe died down, he ended it by saying, all right, let's get down to some real questions. What the bleep you got? You know? Yep. But anyway, you know, by the next day, he wasn't mad at me at all. Like, that was obvious. And now we get to September, and he was trying to get me to ask something that would incite him again. I don't know. I didn't know what he was up to, but I could tell he was up to something. You know, he was trying to egg me on. This went on 2, 3, 4 days in a row. And so we're talking to him before the game one night in his office, and I said to him at one point, I don't know what you're up to, but I've already got one bleep you Jayson tape. I don't need another one. And a little while later, Ralph Bernstein, who was
I remember him,
legendary AP writer, covered all sports in Philadelphia, but spent a lot of time around the Phillies. And Ralph asked something that got under his skin, and he went, bleepity bleep, Ralph. That's worse than that bleeping question Jayson asked. And Ralph played right into his hands and said, what question was that? At that point, Dallas starts ripping through his desk, opens the drawers of his desk, and he's like combing through it looking for something. And now he grabs something out of his desk, and he throws it across the room at me. And I open it up, and it's a T-shirt. And it says, bleep you Jayson. Didn't say bleep. I've still got the T-shirt. Don't tell anybody. But like any time I would see Dallas from that point on for the rest of his life, he would look at me and he'd say, bleep you, Jayson. Still got that shirt?
Great story.
Yeah, it was awesome, and I really did love Dallas Green for all the turbulence. He was one of the smartest people I've ever covered in baseball, and I learned something every day from covering him. And I'm still saddened that he's not around, because every once in a while I would call him up just to entertain him. The last year of the vet, by the way, we got to the anniversary of that game, the Bleep You Jayson game, and they were doing every day this day in vet history. Yeah. And that day, August 12th, whatever year that was, 2003, this day in vet history was the Bleep You Jayson tirade. So I called him up and said, hey, your little Bleep You Jayson diatribe has made it into this day in vet history.
You got time for one more question, Jayson?
Yeah, sure. I'm good.
Okay. And I'll make it my last. We are going to have to do this again after, in another year after everything dies down for you a little bit. Sports journalism is rapidly changing, as we know. Print media is dying. Online journalism is taking its place. Even highly respected journalism programs, like the one you graduated from at Syracuse University, are folding, being replaced by more diverse communications programs. What advice would you give to an aspiring sports journalist today?
All right. Well, that's a big question in today's world. First off, the Newhouse School at Syracuse is not folding.
It's right. No, I didn't. Yeah, I meant.
Yeah, it's bigger and better than ever. It's just more. It just, as you said, it's more multifaceted. Right. There's no more. You can't have a newspaper journalism major anymore, which they had for many years. It's that they've evolved just as the business has evolved, and all media has evolved. That part is actually exciting. We can tell the stories now in many different ways. I grew up wanting to type for a living. I wanted to be a writer. And I tell kids all the time who reach out to me for advice that we don't live in that world anymore. You have to learn to speak into a microphone and look into a camera and understand what makes a good tweet and Facebook post and Instagram post and Snapchat, and you've got to learn how to podcast. And we're going to tell the stories now every way they can be told, because that's how people get their information. Every way the technology zigs and zags, we have to zig and zag right along with it. And it's cool to live in that world. But it has changed the nature of the business in many ways. The Athletic, I hope, is going to break through a really important barrier, that people will learn that it's okay to pay a modest little fee for great writing and great information. Just the way Netflix has changed our TV habits, I hope the Athletic will help to convince people that not everything on the Internet, the best things, has to be for free. The Athletic, a year of the Athletic costs less than a tank of gas, and people love it. And that's important that we get to that place. Or, I don't know where we're all going to wind up writing and what we're all going to wind up reading. But I subscribe now to a number of different outlets. I subscribe to a bunch of newspapers, their digital version, and I subscribe to a bunch of sites digitally, because it's important to support great writing and great journalism. So that I want to get that message in, because that's part of the story. I tell students all the time now that there are more ways to write, to display their wisdom, their talent, their perspective, than there have ever been. Anybody now can blog and carve out their own little website and YouTube and podcast, and if it's good enough, people can find it. The hard part is just getting paid to do it. That is hard. I think there's always going to be a place for great writing and information. We all need it. We all depend on it. It's the fuel that provides fodder for sports talk radio and what you see on TV and what people spout opinions about on their podcasts. And so we need for this profession to exist. And the kids that I meet, I go up to Syracuse. I try to go up every year and meet with the kids from Daily Orange, and their passion, their energy, their intelligence, their thoughtfulness is very inspiring. And so many of them are finding jobs in sports media. We just have to be open-minded and think outside the box. Those jobs might not be what we think they're going to be. One of my daughters went to American University, and I remember going to a session where, the incoming freshman class was going to meet with the Dean of Communications, and she said, I don't know what you guys think you're going to do when you get out of here in 4 years, but there's a really good chance that the job you have is one that doesn't even exist right now. And that is really that's true of now of all three of my kids now that they're all three through school. They're all doing stuff that it wasn't a job when they showed up in college. And that's the world now. There are jobs in social media, right? There are jobs. Like I tell a story all the time about the guy who started MLB Trade Rumors, who didn't even know that he was starting this. He just thought, well, this is interesting. All these rumors that show up all over the internet and all these newspapers at the trade deadline and the winter meetings. Maybe somebody should keep track of them all and round them all up. And next thing you knew, he was quitting his job, and he was hiring kids right out of school to help him. It's really cool, the kind of jobs that just well up organically. And so I just tell kids to keep doing what they're doing and to think outside the box and to make sure they get to know everybody they can get to know who might help them find a job. And those jobs still exist, just not the jobs that we grew up with, Bill.
Jayson, I want to thank you, not just for doing the podcast today. I want to thank you for your writing. The age difference between us is not too terribly great, but you're one of two writers that really inspired the writing that I try to do and hopefully do justice to the inspiration. You and Ray Didinger were the people that I really look to, not just your writing, but also the way you conduct yourself, because I think you were gentlemen in what can be a very, very hard-edged, pull-no-punches profession. So I want to thank you for that, and again, I want to congratulate you for the J.G. Taylor Spink Award. Well deserved, and we'll be seeing you in Cooperstown next summer.
Bill, first off, thanks for mentioning Ray, another one of my heroes. I would say Ray falls into the category of friends and heroes, but just one of the great sports writers in this town who ever lived. And if I'm being compared to him, I'm in good company. I really appreciate you're having me on your podcast. I do listen to it regularly. It's very cool. I'm glad it exists, and I'm really glad I got to be a part of it. And I hope I see you in Cooperstown, and anybody in Philadelphia who's there, please come say hi. I'm very proud to have lived and worked in this city. It means something to me, and Philadelphia is going to be a big part of my weekend in Cooperstown, and thanks Philadelphia. Thanks to you.
Thanks, Jayson. We'll have to do this again. And thank you,
Bill.
Philly fans, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.